when I deal with people is I make it very clear. I don't want to burden you with the anatomy or the physiology or the biochemistry. So we throw terms like this around. When it was in weight loss, we were very, very quick to throw around terms like insulin, a lot of these kinds of
Yeah,
things,
insulin
you know,
resistance and all this thing.
lectin and
Yeah, yeah,
ghrelin
satiety
and,
and all, yeah,
all of these things, which are
hormones.
fine. But honestly, those things for the most part belong in the lab. Okay. I will translate the impact of those things because that for me is much more meaningful for people as they understand. So, for example, if we understand that the brain wired in pursuit and preservation of maximal satisfaction, one of the ways in which it ensures that it keeps going forward is to desensitize to things, right? In other words, if I have my first ice cream and I'm like, that was delicious, and I have my second ice cream, that was nice, then I have my third ice cream. The simple fact of the matter is anything that we engage in, anything sensory, right, has a tendency to decline in satisfaction value the more I use it sort of shortly after the other. And the same would be true for, again, something like a dopamine hit. So I get the rush, okay? But now I need more and more and more of the thing to get the same experiential feeling. And the reason is because we have gone ahead and we've artificially manipulated the environment, the senses, whether it be through flavor enhancers, whether it be through visual stimuli, whether it be through whatever it is that has been manipulated to give us a false sense in many respects, a heightened sensory experience, which feels amazing. What we do is we are setting ourselves up for a desensitization, which means that, again, we are going to be inclined, almost like a drug, to have to keep going back to that sort of instant fix. So if we understand where that's coming from, again, much of what we require in order to enjoy something is to have a little break, is to allow ourselves to resensitize. So when people are coming at it now from the perspective of, let's avoid all social media or avoid all screen time, a detox type of approach like that, the principle is helpful in that you're giving yourself the breathing space to resensitize. Okay. Now, the problem, as with anything that is addictive, well, those first few minutes, hours, days are incredibly difficult to get through and require a tremendous amount of
Self,
self-control, self-regulation,
yes.
which is where we see that might be in the conversation when a person is completely struggling and saying, listen, I'll do anything to feel better right now. Yes, until you don't have what you are dependent on for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or 5 hours. Then it's a matter of, what, can that idea? And here's the problem with that. Anytime I take something on that I fail at, my brain has to process that, and it's got to come up with an explanation. There are 6 things that make us unhappy. The 5th one is unmet expectation. Every time we make a decision, it elicits an expectation. An expectation is a forecast of how I think things are going to be. So when my experience is not consistent with what I was expecting, in other words, my experience is typically, in the case that I'm describing, below what I was expecting, that elicits a negative emotion and lots of question marks that beg an answer. So I either say this detox thing doesn't work. That's the easy answer because it didn't improve anything for me. Or the detox thing works, but I'm just not strong enough to go ahead and deal with it. Or I'm a failure. So oftentimes what we find is when we load the individual, we load the brain, we load them with things that are good, but they are not reasonable in the context of where they are at. We oftentimes set them up for failure, which leaves them in an even lower state, seeking what? To rescue the mood.
Yes.
So we literally, this is why it's so important to understand these things. To go ahead and tell a person you should do this, you shouldn't do that, to do this, to do that, we might be giving them very helpful information. But if we don't understand that that person currently, in their functional state, which is the discussion we've been having, is not in a position to translate those decisions into the kind of action that will serve them very well, we basically are setting them up for more of a problem than actually contributing to any help That's why the vast majority of people who I see for the first time, who are coming in, I use a satisfaction score. 5 out of 5 is life is wonderful. 1 out of 5 is life is horrible. When I see a person who comes in and they say to me, I'm a 1 or a 2, in that case, I always tell them the reason I'm asking this question is because it's going to determine how much I talk. If I hear that you're a 1 or a 2, then that's what I want to do. I'm going to listen because I need to try and understand the situation so well that any recommendation is going to be meaningful with the least possible load. Whereas I tell people, I mean, I can sit down with you right now. After 25 years of being doing what I'm doing, right, in terms of holistic healthcare, there's very, very few things that I'm confronted with in a day that I can't offer meaningful, practical advice to help a person improve their situation. That doesn't mean with every person I sit down, I try and give them objectively the best plan, what they need to think, what they need to eat, how they need to go ahead and exercise, what kind of rest and relaxation, what kind of supplement, what kind of therapy, what kind of medication, what kind of environment. No, why? Because again, when the burden of an intervention outweighs the potential benefit of that intervention, we're doing more harm than good. So everything that I look at doing is with the understanding that we are not always at our best. And with that understanding, whether that is mentally, emotionally, or physically, or in terms of environmentally or circumstantially, if I can't identify those things carefully, it's highly unlikely that I'm going to put together the kind of plan that is meaningful for this person at this point in time. So again, every person, I believe, can benefit from doing some of the basics a little better as they try and get themselves into a functional state that is a little better, that allows them to utilize the kind of information that will take them to somewhat better decisions with somewhat more self-control and produce somewhat of a better outcome. And that's where we find people now starting to go ahead and derive benefit and it builds a sense of confidence. It builds a sense of positive well-being. It builds a sense of I can. And this is what we need to go ahead and grow slowly. Now, I know I deviated tremendously from the point of, the idea of detox. The bottom line is this: the more we are exposed to anything, right, the more we desensitize. Resensitization is probably a massively underlooked or underconsidered thing that we need to be doing as we try and rebuild a person to a position where they can actually go ahead and make genuinely meaningful change. But that only comes when we have an understanding. So whether we're going to talk, dopamine, or we're going to talk about any of the other neurotransmitters, honestly, it comes down to translate that into something practical. The more you do this, the more dependent you become. The more dependent you become, the more you're going to want it, because it's not going to give you the same satisfaction value. We need to recognize that that is a very slippery slope. So let's provide you with the kinds of things that are good for all the things that are happening in your brain, and then say to you that the difficulty that comes from the withdrawal is contributing to a resensitization, so that guess what? You'll be able to enjoy these things even more once the mind, the brain, the body have allowed themselves to be better prepared for something that is possibly not quite as frequent, not quite intense. And all of a sudden we can enjoy the natural sounds and sights and flavors that really are back to what we would term the simple things in life. I mean, I have the privilege of working at probably one of the most luxurious hotels in the world. You and I know where that is. And one of the things that fascinated me when I had the privilege of walking through there before they opened was the emphasis on some of the simplest things. These are people who can afford, who've experienced probably just about everything in life. But what I noticed, and I noticed this a couple of years ago, the emphasis for those people is, let's go back to simplicity, because there is almost a matter of they're so overwhelmed and desensitized to the complexity of the things that people are offering that sometimes it's just a little bit more of a simple, smaller, quieter, still attention to detail, but that is a picture of the thing that I'm describing right now. We see it. The mind, the brain, the body needs a break from even nice things at times in order to allow it to enjoy the things in a way that they are actually intended.